Welcome. Another interesting conversation that I will give you my viewpoint. This is a series of calls that are discussing Charles Eisenstein's proposals that there are ways that society has built itself that he calls the old story, which was considered to be the truth about what the world was. And then he proposes that there has to be a new story because, well, we need to have a society and a culture that is more sustainable for the future. So the old story that he says that has run a lot of our, I guess, the way our society approaches the world is science has brought us from ignorance and superstition to true knowledge. Now, I think science became a preferred or more valued way to look at the world because there was so much superstition. And people who had any thinking mind said, this does not work. You've got to really sit back and measure the way the world is before you can make a decision about how it works. One of the conversations we had today was that science keeps changing. It keeps discovering. So what it thought, let's say the science about the mind, the brain was considered to be unchangeable up through the latter part of the last century. Then from like 1960 to 2000, the field of neuroplasticity developed, and wow, then now science knows that the brain is one of the most malleable organs in the body and that it can shift what it uses for one function or another. And that people are not doomed who are born with maybe part of a brain missing or who have injury to their brain, that the brain can be worked with in order to help them function in the world. So that's just one example of how science keeps shifting what it believes to be true. So as long as we understand that we are always discovering new, so science will keep discovering new, and that the old is not the fact forever. It is simply the latest piece of what they discovered. When they got at the beginning of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, they discovered quantum field, which meant that everything you researched was impacted by the observer. Duh. And then from that point on, took us a whole century to get our heads around that. But the truth is that will always impact how we view what we see and view in the world. So one, we all agree that science has given us something, but it is not true knowledge because that knowledge keeps adjusting itself to what the latest discovery is, the new viewpoint, the new perspective. So what the new story is, what Eisenstein suggests is that he says knowledge and ways of knowing outside of science are essential to human development and practical affairs. We really ended up talking about the practical side of that. If you have that there are groups we're just talking the United States, that are working to help people in food deserts. So that's one example of trying to change and shift people's experience of life to give them a foundation for greater health, to give the children a foundation of a greater health. Other people are working to create areas safe. Other people are working to create ways for people to have mediation, to get to know somebody of an opposite position in a way that they come to understand common values. So all of these grassroots efforts are to help people open up to more about what the other person is. I think it's really easy if we sit in our little bubble and say, everything I've been told is the only thing that's true. And if you don't believe me, then you are wrong. We're losing something. the more that we teach people to open up to other human beings as other human beings, the more that we help people have safe places to live, and the more that we help people have food in their neighborhoods so their children can be fed, the more we take care of those who are less fortunate, the more we bring up society so more people can see beyond the trauma and to see more possibilities. So when I first read this statement, knowledge and ways of knowing outside of science are essential to human development and practical affairs, I immediately thought of a lot of the spiritual work I do and the connection to spirit and growing and getting a greater connection to the energetics of life. And our conversation took that other bent. It said, well, how do you help people? They're not going to be open up to, let's say, astral travel, lucid dreaming, if they don't have enough food, if they aren't in a safe neighborhood, if they aren't, they don't have a thinking pattern that helps them be creative and critical thinking. So there's a lot of places that I believe human development and practical affairs can be helped in the future. If we as a community start helping those, all of us, be with others, learn critical thinking, practice it, learn creative, learn to be in communication with others in a way that opens up to the humanity of them, then we're taking everybody up a step. So when we were talking, I was thinking of Maslow's, hierarchy of needs, and we all need to have the basic survival taken care of. We all need that thriving there before we can go beyond to any other experience of what it is to be a human being. Historic trauma can really hold our thinking in a rigid pattern. Feeling there's no other options to live life in a way that we crave to live it can lead to frustration and anxiety and fighting out. We were talking about why sometimes young men get attracted to something like, let's say, the Proud Boys. And I was saying, if you haven't been given an education where helps you think through things critically, if you haven't been given an education that helps you have different tools, not just for thinking, but for doing with your body, then you really don't have a lot of options. You have a lot of frustration, and you haven't thought through kind of who I am as a person, because that's not in the let's say, it's not in the curriculum of the school for sure. And then the only people who say, yeah, we feel like you too, would be something like Proud Boys. So they don't provide something positive in that, helping these people become more of who they came here to be. They just say, yeah, this is bad, and we'll fight against it. So all that energy and frustration gets thrown out against others instead of an opening to and listening and being with others. So we all felt like the answer has to come from the community, from the ground level, that we can help our own in our community. We can participate in these. There's groups called the Bridging Community and Braver Angels, I know in California at least, that really help people learn to talk to somebody who supposedly has a different solution or different opinion than they do. They have processes, they kind of call it mediation, but it's more of helping people open up to the humanity of another person, to their shared values versus a position. So we still may have a different solution, but we don't villainize the other. And that's how you can have conversations. You can have conversations about creating new realities for your community if you are in we want the same value. We want the same thing, so how can we make that correct? Even though we both had solutions that were totally opposite before, how can we create something together? When we do that, whether it's for the education system or the food system, um, or even the political system, how do we help more people belong to groups that will build their desire to be with others and be more of who they came here to be? Um, you Most of the time, I think that we cannot get into the kinds of things that I was thinking about immediately, be it, spiritual work, self growing on my own sense of who I am. That's my work. But if somebody is poor and doesn't have any food or doesn't live in a safe place, they're not going to get there because they have to pay attention to survival. So anyway, we totally agree with him that that we need to pay attention to this shifting patterns of how we interact, shifting patterns of how we teach, shifting patterns of how we approach others, is a grassroots effort, so that people begin to understand that there isn't a truth. Knowledge is science always changes what is the truth because they discover more. As we are able to listen to another in a way that we see their humanity, we open up to the more of what could possibly happen. If we are able to find out more about all the choices available, all the options available, and how we live our lives, then we open up to the more. And we're not stuck in thinking, either angry about where we've been or frustrated that we have nowhere to go. And so it's up to each of us to do our part. One of my friends on the call wants to help a group that essentially is trying to bring an organic farming into a food desert. And while she doesn't feel like she's able to help them in the actual physical work, she was thinking, well, maybe I could help, like find grants for them, or I could help with, gathering individuals to really help them. So another woman is part of this bridging community work where they engage communities in mediation and in learning to recognize each other's common values. And each of us has children and grandchildren who are making choices different than we make. And the more that we open up to them having possibilities beyond, let's say, what was possible for our own generation, we support them in taking that first step outside of what was prescribed by our society. It's on all of us to create a new world, to create a new sustainable future for the generations rising. Let's get it done let's create something for our common humanity now with the people who live here, so that their children and grandchildren come into the world viewing possibility and options and choice as theirs. And that's my thoughts for the day. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week after our next conversation.